Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a village where the roofs sag a little. The paths twist in ways that don't make sense, and the darkness seems to breathe just a bit too close to your ear. You're standing there in the cool medieval air, listening to the wind rattle wooden shutters while a faint creak echoes from the old communal barn. It's the kind of sound that makes you freeze, wondering if it's an animal, a thief, or something the villagers pretend absolutely does not exist. And don't worry, you probably won't survive this. But that's half the charm of medieval life, right? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always fun seeing the whole world tucked into bed together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along the village's central ridge path, feeling the packed earth beneath your boots vibrate slightly with each step. The night air is cool, but there's a strange heaviness to it, as though the entire place is holding its breath. A creak rushes out again from the barn, long, strained, almost like a question. The villagers say it's just the beam settling, but the beams have supposedly been settling for 20 years. If they were settling any harder, they'd be underground by now. That's the first quiet disaster you notice, the noises no one will acknowledge. Medieval villages had no shortage of nighttime sounds. Wind against thatch, mice in the grain, pigs snoring like overworked uncles. Yet there were always a few sounds people ignored on purpose. A little too rhythmic, a little too heavy, a little too close, and you can almost feel the villagers' silent agreement. If we don't name it, it can't be a problem. Historians still argue whether villagers genuinely believed in every spirit story they told, or whether these tales were just an easy way to explain building decay, animal intrusions, or poorly maintained structures. You stop beside a crooked cottage whose door seems to breathe inward before settling. A faint tapping comes from inside, steady as a heartbeat. The family claims it's the old cupboard, and to be fair, everything in a medieval home is old, including the cupboards, the beams, the chairs, the walls, the oven, basically everything except the fleas, which are always aggressively young and surprisingly ambitious. But tonight the tapping feels different, like something pacing, testing the edge of the room. That's the thing. People didn't have the luxury of admitting every problem. A strange creaking or tapping could mean structural failure. And structural failure meant repairs, and repairs meant money, and medieval households often had as much spare money as a toddler has spare patience. So the strategy was simple: ignore it. Let the disaster stay quiet. As you walk past the livestock pens, a low moan rises from the shadows. Not quite human, not quite animal. A goose honks in irritation. Even the animals seem tired of pretending nothing strange is happening. You take a step closer and feel the wooden post tremble beneath your hand. It's probably just a loose joint, but again, probably is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Villagers knew that anything odd happening at night could create panic. Rumours, after all, travelled faster than travellers. A single noise could become a ghost story by morning. And once something became a ghost story, good luck convincing anyone to actually fix the broken hinge causing it. It's not easy to climb a ladder when your neighbour claims the barn beams whisper names. Of course, every village had that one older resident who insisted nothing was wrong, usually while furiously making the sign against evil. Their philosophy was clear: accept nothing unusual, because unusual things attract attention from landlords, tax collectors, and clergy, none of whom are known for bringing snacks or helpful attitudes. A sudden thump breaks the silence behind you. You turn, heart thumping louder than a festival drum. A cat darts across the path, annoyed that you dared to exist near its chosen walking route. The villagers, if they saw your reaction, would have laughed. Lightly, kindly, but with that medieval edge that says, yeah, we jump too, but we'll pretend we don't. The truth is, even though animals caused many of the strange noises, more unusual explanations persisted. One fringe tidbit tells of villagers believing that creaking boards at night were messages from ancestors warning about chores left undone. Look, if your grandma is haunting you just to remind you to sweep the floor, medieval life is officially more exhausting than modern adulthood. Still, you sense something unspoken as you continue. Something heavy in the way the air seems to shift before each noise. It's as if the village itself is trying to hide its fractures, pretending it's sturdier than it is. You can almost see the effort. Crooked beams propped with mismatched planks, latches tied with frayed rope, doors held shut by stones placed just right. Quiet disasters always began like this. Unexplained sounds, ignored warnings, a few villagers glancing at each other for too long before looking away. You pause, feeling another creak ripple through the ground as if echoing up from beneath the soil, and for a moment you're not sure whether it's the village settling, or something moving beneath it. Either way, no one here would dare mention it out loud. Not yet. You move farther down the sloping path, feeling the ground soften under your boots as you draw near the village's cluster of wells. A thin mist creeps along the stones, gathering in the dips where water has splashed over the years. The wells look calm enough, circular stone rims, wooden buckets, ropes worn smooth by decades of hands, but you sense a subtle tension in the way villagers glance at them. Not directly, of course. That would mean acknowledging the problem, and acknowledging the problem means someone has to fix it, and fixing it cost money, effort, and probably a few arguments about whose nephew borrowed the last working bucket hook. You lean over one of the wells and breathe in. The air drifting upward should be crisp, cool, a little earthy. Instead, it smells faintly metallic with an oddly sweet undertone. Something you can't place, but your instincts file under, no thank you. Medieval villagers occasionally dealt with contaminated water from tannery runoff, animal pens, or natural mineral deposits. But openly admitting water problems could cause panic or force the village to formally report shortages, which risked intervention from local authorities who were notorious for helping with the enthusiasm of a napping slug. A woman passes by carrying 2 empty pots and offers you a smile that's way too bright for someone fetching water at dawn. "Perfectly fine," she says before you even ask. Then she hurries off, not so subtly avoiding the well you're looking into. Historians still argue whether such avoidance was rooted in genuine belief that problems could be talked away, or if villagers carefully pretended ignorance to avoid guilt if someone fell ill. Either way, the strategy of denial was as strong as any oak beam in the village hall. You dip a bucket, haul it up, and peer inside. The water is clear enough. You tilt it slightly, and a thin, oily sheen glides across the top like a shy ghost trying to escape your scrutiny. You glance around, half expecting a villager to shout, "Don't look too close!" But they just pass by, busying themselves with chores that, conveniently, pull them away from the wells. The irony is almost comforting. Medieval life had so many challenges that ignoring a tiny disaster was basically a survival strategy. When you're worried about taxes, wolves, bad weather, and whether your roof might fall on your face, weird-tasting water slides down the priority list. You take a step back as another villager arrives, humming off-key to signal absolute confidence in the situation. He dips his pot, fills it halfway, then immediately dumps the top inch of water out. Quick motion, no hesitation. It's a practiced gesture, and you get the sense he's been doing it for months, maybe years. He winks at you with the exhausted bravado of someone who knows the water isn't great but would rather eat a boot than admit it. "Just the morning frost making it taste funny," he mutters. There is no frost. Not even a single frosty anything within 20 miles. But sure, blame the frost. A quirky tidbit floats into your memory. Some medieval communities believed that wells could become offended by gossip and sulk, making the water taste worse. So households were careful not to argue near them. That belief actually discouraged public fights, an early form of conflict management via superstitious hydration etiquette. You glance around and notice families speaking softly, almost too softly, as if one loud word might make the well roll its watery eyes and shut down completely. As you stroll toward the next well, the ground feels slightly uneven beneath your feet. A small puddle seeps out from a crack in the stones, glistening under the dim light. It's warmer than the air around it. You crouch, passing your fingers through it. The water isn't just warm. It's oddly warm, like it's been sitting underground next to something it shouldn't. Medieval villagers sometimes encountered natural hot springs, but when random wells warmed up, it usually meant contamination or underground instability. But once again, no one mentions it. The village elder approaches, leaning heavily on his stick, the way someone leans on a friend who owes them money. He eyes the puddle briefly, then sighs. Just the earth breathing, then louder to the sky. "Everything's fine." His voice cracks, and he coughs into his sleeve. You're about 63% sure the earth breathing is not a recognized scientific explanation for lukewarm puddles, but you let it slide. You're trying to be a good visitor. A faint breeze picks up, carrying the faint odour of something sulphurous. You scan the wells again, watching the ropes sway gently as if the village itself is unsure whether to reveal or conceal the truth. A chicken across the path squawks angrily at its own reflection in a puddle, and honestly, relatable. The villager's reluctance becomes even more apparent when a young boy approaches the well, fills a cup, takes a sip, grimaces dramatically, then looks around guiltily like he's committed treason by tasting the truth. His mother swoops in, swats his arm lightly and hisses, "Don't make faces, people will talk," because nothing says, "Everything is perfectly normal," like forbidding facial expressions, but you understand why they hide it. Water problems could mean dehydration, sickness, or being forced to fetch water from the distant river, a river known for being colder than your last breakup and twice as unforgiving. It's easier, perhaps even safer, to pretend nothing is wrong. The village runs on routine, and routine cannot afford to be disrupted by quiet disasters bubbling up in the wells. So you keep walking, feeling the weight of the secrets underground and the heavier weight of the silence above. Every bucket drawn carries a little fear with it, every sip a little denial, and every villager you pass smiles just a little too quickly, as though the taste on their tongues tells a truth they refuse to speak. You leave the uneasy wells behind, stepping toward the village granary where the cool air grows thick with the faint scent of old wood and stored harvest. The building looms like a squat guardian, big, heavy, and pretending everything inside is perfectly fine. But as you approach, a faint sourness prickles your nose. It's the kind of smell that whispers something is wrong, even if everyone pretends it's just the natural aroma of hard-working grain, which is a phrase villagers use the same way modern people say, "It's supposed to smell like that." You push open the creaking door, another door trying desperately to warn you about its feelings, and slip into the dim interior. At first, everything looks ordinary. Sacks stacked neatly, barrels sealed tight, floor swept to passable standards. But the moment you breathe again, the sour note sharpens, sneaking under the regular scent of straw and dust. You kneel beside one of the sacks, run your hand across the rough fabric, and feel the stiff crust where moisture has seeped through. Grain shouldn't sweat, not unless it's alive, haunted, or, far more realistically, rotting. You tug the sack open and peer inside. The grains look normal near the top, but deeper down you spot the faintest hint of discoloration, a speckling of pale fuzz that crawls along the husks like a shy invader. You freeze, eyebrows lifting, and whisper quietly, "Oh no!" The grain whispers back by smelling even worse. Before you can investigate further, the granary keeper appears at the doorway, clearing his throat with the kind of forced cheeriness that deserves an award. "Good, isn't it?" he says. "A fine harvest, best in years." His voice wavers on the last word. You raise an eyebrow. He coughs again, louder. "A little dampness never hurt anyone," he insists, which is exactly what someone says right before dampness hurts everyone. Because the truth is, medieval grain didn't need much humidity to turn into a fungal playground. Damp harvests meant mould, and mould meant sick stomachs, hallucinations, or bread that tasted like disappointment. But villagers often hid these signs for fear that revealing spoiled stores would lead to forfeited tithes or punishments for careless stewardship. Historians still argue whether villagers truly believed mild rot was harmless, or whether their survival instinct simply prioritized having food over having safe food. You reach deeper into the sack, pulling up a handful of grain. It clumps slightly, sticking between your fingers. One grain practically sighs in exhaustion. You glance at the keeper. He is absolutely refusing to meet your eyes. Instead, he launches into a rambling explanation about how the night air has been behaving strangely, as though humidity is a mischievous sprite trying to ruin everyone's day. A quirky tidbit whispers through your memory. Some medieval communities believed that mould on grain was caused by night elves, who danced on the sacks when villagers slept badly. The cure? Better sleep. Which honestly is the kind of wellness advice influencers would still give today. The keeper finally steps inside, lowering his voice like he's sharing royal gossip. "We've set aside the worst sacks," he says, pointing to a far corner where several bags sag like exhausted pillows. "For the animals. They don't mind." He says this with the confidence of someone who has never met an animal. Then he glances left and right and adds, barely above a whisper, "But don't tell the reeve, or the priest, or anyone really." Your eyes follow the line of sacks, noticing more subtle signs. A dark patch along the wall where moisture drips from an unseen crack. Barrels whose lids sit slightly askew, the faint buzzing of insects that have found a 5-star buffet. The granary feels like a quiet battlefield, one where the enemy isn't an army, but a moisture level of 16% or higher. You cross to another stack, opening one more sack. This one looks better, but when you inhale, you catch that faint musty scent again. Not overwhelming, just enough to say, soon. It's the olfactory equivalent of a plot twist, the kind you don't want. A muffled thud sounds overhead. You glance up and spot a beam darkened with age, and possibly mould, running the length of the roof. It sags slightly, as though resigned to life. The keeper notices your stare and sighs. It's been doing that for years, he says, perfectly safe. Then, because fate loves drama, a pinch of dust drifts down from the beam like the granary is trying to argue. You brush the dust off your shoulder, suppressing a laugh. You're already 3 jokes deep in your mind. One about the beam needing emotional support, one about the grain applying for early retirement, and one about how this is why medieval bread tasted like adventure. You move deeper into the granary, your boots crunching softly on old straw. The temperature shifts, cooler near the walls, warmer near the centre. That's when you notice the faint, sticky sheen along the floor leading toward a cluster of barrels. The keeper groans. We had 1 barrel split in the night, he says, rubbing his temples. Probably overfilled. Probably. Or perhaps the wood itself is giving up quietly, like everything else in the village. You crouch near the broken barrel, touching the pooled grain mash. It's sour, almost alcoholic. Medieval villagers knew spontaneous fermentation when they smelled it, but explaining that the grain was basically trying to become beer wasn't something they wanted admitted in front of officials. Spoiled grain meant trouble. Trouble meant blame, and blame always rolled downhill like an overly ambitious goat. You stand slowly, feeling the air grow heavier with each breath. The granary keeper watches you, waiting to see if you'll expose the truth or join the silent conspiracy. But you already understand their choice. This is survival wrapped in denial, a quiet disaster hidden under burlap. You dust off your hands, tighten your cloak and step back toward the door. Behind you, the granary creaks softly. Its own version of a guilty whisper, and the mould waits, patient, silent and determined. You slip out of the granary and head down the sloping path toward the mill, following the soft rumble of the millstone turning in its endless grinding circle. The sound is steady, familiar, almost comforting, until you notice the slight hitch in its rhythm, like a breath caught in a lie. You walk closer, boots crunching over scattered husks, and the hitch becomes more pronounced. A faint groan, a dragging hum, a pause too long to be accidental. The millstone is hungry, but not for grain. It's hungry because it's been run too long, too hard, with too little harvest to feed it. The miller spots you through the open doorway, gives a cheerful wave, and immediately wipes his brow, like he's trying to erase the stress rather than the sweat. Just another good grinding day, he calls. His tone is a beat too bright. Medieval millers were often the most scrutinized workers in a village. If there wasn't enough flour, people blamed them before they blamed the weather, the harvest, or physics itself. So when things started to go wrong, like now, they smiled bigger and talked faster. You step inside, where the air smells of flour dust and nervous optimism. The millstone turns with a grating edge, chewing through what looks suspiciously like a mix of good grain, borderline grain, and outright, we'll pretend that's grain. The miller coughs as the dust swirls, waves a hand dismissively and mutters, just the usual, pure, perfect, premium flour. He avoids eye contact with the sack labelled bestish grain. You watch him pour another scoop into the hopper. You hear the faint slap of clumping kernels, grain that's absorbed too much moisture, the kind that resists grinding unless the millstone is adjusted to within a hair's width of self-destruction. Historians still argue whether millers intentionally mixed lower quality grain to stretch their supplies, or whether they genuinely believed a bit of dampness adds character. You suspect the truth is both, and neither, depending on how many angry villagers are waiting outside on any given morning. As the stone grinds, a fine cloud of flour drifts into the beams of light. It almost looks beautiful, like soft snowfall. Then you breathe in and immediately realize the beauty ends exactly where the coughing begins. You steady yourself, eyes watering slightly. The miller pats your back. A sign of good flour, he says. A beat later, he He turns away to hack into a towel, proving that medieval marketing techniques were already in full force. You move toward the great wooden gear mechanism, watching the way the teeth interlock. They're worn, splintered here and there, patched with bits of leather and wedges of wood the miller has hammered in with hopeful force. These repairs aren't official. These are please don't break today fixes. One good jolt and the whole assembly might seize. A quirky tidbit floats through your mind. Some millers believed greasing the gears with pig fat ensured smoother grinding because pigs were stubbornly lucky. Whether the luck came from the pig or the miller's desperation is still an open question. The miller notices you examining the gears and clears his throat with authority he hasn't earned. "All up to code," he says, which is impressive considering medieval building codes were mostly, "If it hasn't fallen yet, it's fine." You walk back toward the millstone, feeling the floorboards creak beneath your weight. They sag slightly, just a little, enough to suggest that the whole structure is basically a wooden Jenga tower with delusions of stability. The miller pretends not to hear the creak. You pretend not to acknowledge it. The floor pretends it didn't just reveal its darkest fears. A villager enters carrying a small bag of grain. You watch as he hesitates, passing it to the miller with a quick glance around the room. "Make it fine," he whispers. "Wife says the bread tastes different." The word different hangs in the air like a diplomatic insult. Medieval households didn't complain lightly. If bread tasted off, it meant the grain was turning, or the flour was cut with chaff, or the millstone had worn unevenly, producing bits of stone as crunchy surprises. The miller nods solemnly, but you catch the flicker of worry in his eyes. The villager also sneaks a glance toward a small side pile, grain clearly in worse shape, stacked behind a barrel as though hiding it makes the mould go away. The miller skillfully redirects his customer's attention, chattering about weather predictions and how next year's harvest will be absolutely legendary, the same way someone today talks about next Monday's diet. You step back outside for air, leaning on the low stone wall overlooking the river that powers the mill's wheel. The water churns steadily, but even here you sense something off. Foam collecting near the edge, twigs tangled in the wheel's paddles, a softness in the current that suggests lower flow than usual. If the river slows too much, the mill won't run. And if the mill won't run, the village loses its flour. And if the village loses its flour, well, no one wants to think about that. Historians still argue whether villagers understood how fragile their food systems were, or whether they believed divine protection would cover the gaps. Standing here, watching the miller sweat as he forces a smile, you suspect they knew exactly how fragile everything was, and simply chose to whisper their fears to the floorboards instead of each other. You return inside one last time, watching the millstone wobble ever so slightly as it turns. It's subtle, almost gentle, but enough to remind you that this entire operation is balancing on hope, patched gears, and denial. The miller hands you a small pouch of flour on your way out. "On the house," he says proudly. You peek inside. It looks mostly flour-like, and in this village, that counts as a triumph. You step into the sunlight, leaving behind the steady hum of a millstone stretching itself thin, grinding more than just grain, grinding time itself, delaying a disaster everyone hopes will stay silent. You follow the winding lane away from the mill, feeling the ground firm beneath your boots as the air grows sharper with the scent of burning wood. Smoke curls lazily above the cottages, thin grey wisps rising into the cool sky. At first glance, everything looks normal. Fires are just part of medieval life. Cooking, warming, drying clothes, smoking meats, accidentally singeing eyebrows, just the usual. But as you draw closer, you notice it. Some of the smoke looks wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Not "the house is on fire" wrong. More like "that's not a normal colour" wrong. A faint yellowish tint mixed into the grey. A sour note beneath the usual earthy aroma. You sniff once, then again. Yep, something is definitely off. The villagers, however, move with absolute calm, carrying firewood, tending pots, pretending not to inhale the suspicious fumes at all. A woman stirs a pot over her hearth, smiling at you with tight cheer. "Lovely morning for cooking," she chirps. You nod politely, though the smoke billowing from her chimney smells like a combination of damp straw and mild regret. She's burning wood that isn't fully cured, something villagers did when they were desperate or hiding shortages. Burning green wood created thick, choking smoke. but admitting you were out of proper firewood meant admitting mismanagement, which was basically medieval social doom. You walk past another cottage, leaning closer as darker smoke pushes from the chimney in slow, choking pulses. That's not cooking smoke. That's problem smoke. It holds the faint aroma of something organic, not food, burning in the hearth. A tanner's scrap. Wet peat. Maybe the villagers are burning refuse to stretch their fuel. Historians still argue whether this was common practice or an emergency tactic, but everyone agrees it made the air smell like a dragon with sinus issues. As you approach the cottage wall, you hear a muffled argument inside. A man's voice hisses urgently. "Don't open the flue too wide, it'll draw attention." A second voice snaps back. "It's already drawing attention by stinking." A third voice, older and weary, mutters, "We'll say it's the chimney settling." That phrase again. Everything is always settling, beams, grain, smoke, reality itself. You keep walking, hands tucked into your cloak as you pass a cluster of houses where the smoke rises in perfectly normal fashion. Thin, grey, with that warm scent of firewood. The contrast makes the strange-smelling chimneys stand out even more. Here and there you spot villagers eyeing the unusual smoke, then quickly looking away, adopting the medieval equivalent of, "I didn't see anything, and I'm definitely not getting involved." A quirky tidbit pops into your mind. Many medieval communities believed chimney smoke colour predicted luck. White smoke meant blessings. Dark smoke meant unrest. Yellowish smoke? People whispered that it drew unwanted spirits, because apparently medieval spirits were picky about air quality. The belief was fringe, but persistent enough that households sometimes burned specific herbs to sweeten the smoke. You glance up and notice a few chimneys releasing pleasantly scented plumes, lavender, maybe sage, masking the real culprit beneath. You duck under a cottage eave where a man kneels beside the hearth, poking at logs with a long iron rod. He glances up, guilt practically radiating off him. "Just clearing the flue," he says too quickly. You peek inside and spot a small pile of damp, half-rotted logs. No one in their right medieval mind would burn these unless absolutely necessary, or unless they were trying to hide signs of sickness inside the house. Sickness meant quarantine. Quarantine meant the reeve locking doors and taking inventory, and no one wanted that. From inside you hear a soft cough. A child's. The man stiffens. You look at him gently. He shakes his head with a brittle smile. "Just the smoke," he insists. You both know it's not the smoke. Villagers step gingerly around these situations, pretending not to notice when smoke patterns change or linger too thickly. Sometimes heavy smoke meant someone was trying to fumigate a room. Sometimes it meant a feverish person was burning herbs to breathe easier. And sometimes it meant someone had passed away and the family didn't want to attract the priest until they were ready. You step back and observe from the lane. The chimneys tell stories, some honest, some fearful, some desperate. A few plumes rise too hot, too fast, indicating overloaded hearths. Perhaps someone is boiling laundry because winter illnesses have arrived. Perhaps they're boiling water again and again to stretch what little drinkable supply remains. Historians still debate whether smoke patterns can reliably indicate domestic crises, but when you stand here watching, you can almost read the whole village like a secret map. Farther down, a tall chimney belches smoke with a sharp, acrid sting. You recognize this immediately. A tannery fire. Tanners burned scraps, hides, and waste to keep predators and pests away. The village despised the smell, but tolerated it because they needed leather, and also because no one wanted to argue with a man who spent his day elbow-deep in unknown substances. A little girl runs past you holding her sleeve over her nose. "It smells like the devil's bath water," she complains. You snort. Fair assessment. You pause at the edge of the lane where the smoke clears slightly and watch the entire village breathe in sync. Chimneys puffing rhythmically, fires warming bread ovens, smoke curling into the blue morning sky. Beneath the normalcy, though, you sense the stress, fuel shortages, hidden sickness, questionable burnables, quiet disasters rising with every plume. You take one last slow breath, taste the mixture of wood, herbs, and secrets lingering on your tongue, then continue down the lane. Because in this village, smoke doesn't just rise, it reveals. You follow the road out toward the edge of the village, where the house is thin and the ground begins to slope in odd, uneven waves. The fields ahead look peaceful enough, long grasses bending in the morning breeze, patches of tilled earth, A few scattered sheep chewing with the kind of determination only animals convinced their philosophers possess. But as you step farther out, the soil beneath your boots shifts slightly, not dramatically, just a gentle, unsettling give, as though the earth is exhaling beneath you. You stop, shift your weight. The ground dips half an inch. That's never a good sign in a medieval village. Villagers rarely spoke of sinking ground unless someone's house actually collapsed into it, because acknowledging the dips early meant acknowledging the reason for them. Old mine tunnels running silently beneath the fields. Many medieval communities sat on top of abandoned pits dug generations earlier, their supports long rotted away. But admitting this, that would mean notifying the Lord, and notifying the Lord often meant new taxes, new inspections, and possibly new labour requirements, which meant absolutely not. A farmer walks by with a hoe over his shoulder, whistling a tune that suggests he's either blissfully unaware of the ground's treachery or extremely committed to pretending it's fine. "Soil's a bit soft today," he offers casually. You nod, and he quickly adds, "But that just means it's fertile." His smile twitches. You both know fertility is not the issue. You follow the path toward a low ridge, feeling occasional pockets of hollow resonance beneath your steps. Tiny echoes, faint but unmistakable. The ground sounds like it's hiding something. Historians still argue whether villagers knew the exact layout of the old tunnels beneath them, or whether they simply lived with the uncertainty, trusting a mixture of habit, hope, and denial. Considering the way your boots keep sinking half an inch at random intervals, you suspect they knew, and chose silence. A small depression catches your eye, a circular dip, maybe 2 feet across, rimmed by slightly darker soil. It's fresh. You crouch, press your hand to the earth. The crust gives gently, like an underbaked loaf of bread. You pull your hand back very slowly just in case the ground is contemplating swallowing you out of spite. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some medieval villagers believed that sudden sinkholes were signs of underground dragons turning in their sleep. Not malevolent dragons, just mildly inconvenienced ones. The solution? Place offerings of milk or bread near the hole to keep the dragon calm. You glance around and actually spot a small clay cup sitting by one depression. Either this family is extremely superstitious or extremely desperate. A shepherd approaches, leading 3 sheep who look significantly more confident than the villagers you've met so far. "Don't step too far that way," he warns, nodding toward a patch of grass that looks identical to every other patch. Ground's a bit unpredictable. His voice lowers. "You didn't hear that from me." The sheep bleat dramatically, as though objecting to the secrecy. He hushes them like unruly children. You take a few cautious steps forward. The earth feels wrong, too hollow. You try a gentle stomp. The ground vibrates faintly. "Okay, that's enough stomping for today," the shepherd winces. "Careful, you'll wake it." "Wake what?" you ask. He shrugs. "Whatever's down there." Then he walks away before you can ask follow-up questions. Medieval villagers had a special talent for sharing just enough information to increase your anxiety. You wander farther, tracing the subtle depressions in the land. They form patterns, some circular, some linear, some zigzagging like a drunken snake. It dawns on you. These are collapsed supports. The tunnels below are shifting slowly, quietly, steadily. One day they'll give way completely, but until they do, the villagers will keep ploughing, planting, grazing, and whistling with forced optimism. Near a cluster of trees, you spot a cottage whose foundation stones lean slightly outward, as though trying to escape. The roof sags in the middle, and the chimney tilts like it's contemplating early retirement. A woman sweeps her doorstep, studiously ignoring the fact that the entire front of her house is inching downward. You nod a greeting. She nods back, then immediately shifts her weight to hide how much the ground sinks beneath her left foot. Inside the cottage, you hear a pan clang sharply, followed by a muttered curse and a thump. You picture a stool sliding slightly across the slanted floor. This is the type of domestic hazard villagers never mentioned aloud, because doing so would force the question nobody wanted to ask. How long before the ground swallows the house? The cottage's doorframe groans softly. You catch the woman's eye. She smiles, and her broom keeps sweeping at a faster, almost panicked tempo. You continue along the ridge until you reach a large circular depression, with broken fence posts leaning inward, as though sucked toward a center point. You kneel to inspect the soil. It's damp, too damp. The kind of damp that suggests groundwater is seeping into the tunnels, and groundwater plus rotted wooden supports. Just a medieval disaster stew. You place your palm on the earth. It trembles very faintly, like someone drumming lightly on a table below. It might be water, could be settling, might even be small rock shifts. Historians still debate whether underground collapses happened gradually or suddenly. Standing here, you feel like the ground is trying to decide whether to wait politely or make a dramatic entrance. A final gust of wind rattles the grass around you. The soil dips a fraction of an inch under your boot. Just enough to remind you, some disasters don't roar. They breathe quietly beneath your feet, waiting. As you step back from the trembling fields, you follow a narrow path toward the village outskirts where the cottages grow quieter. The windows shuttered even during daylight, and the air carries the unmistakable heaviness of unspoken worry. You feel it before you see it. A subtle stillness, a thinning of sound, as though the birds themselves know to keep their distance. This part of the village isn't cursed or abandoned. It's simply where people go when they're not feeling well. Or, in less diplomatic terms, where the villagers hide anything that might be plague-adjacent, because no one here says the word plague, ever. It's the medieval equivalent of saying Macbeth in a theatre, except instead of superstition, it's pure survival instinct. You pass a shuttered cottage where a faint cough interrupts the silence. A single cough, sharp, wet. Not the gentle, I inhaled flour dust cough you heard in the mill, more like, my lungs are filing complaints. But the door remained shut, the windows latched, the doorway swept clean as though illness can be fooled by good housekeeping. A woman across the lane glances nervously at the sound, then quickly resumes stirring a pot outdoors, pretending the noise came from the wind, or a goat, or maybe reality glitching for a moment. You know better, and so does she. Villagers often renamed sicknesses to avoid stigma, the bad cold, the heavy humours, the sweating fits, the lingering weariness. Anything except plague. Historians still argue whether this tactic actually helped morale, or whether it accelerated the spread by convincing people they were just a little tired. Based on the way people are giving this entire cluster of homes a 10-foot radius of personal space, you suspect they know exactly what's happening. You approach one cottage where a faint herbal smell seeps through the cracks. Sage, rosemary, maybe thyme. Medieval folk believed aromatic herbs could ward off disease, which is adorable, considering some of them also believed vinegar could cure anything except procrastination. A small bundle of dried lavender hangs above the door, a charm, a plea. A young boy sits on the doorstep peeling bark from a stick. His eyes are ringed with exhaustion. When he sees you, he straightens, wipes his nose on his sleeve and says with too much confidence, "My mum just has a chill." A muffled groan from inside contradicts him. He looks away. You nod and keep walking, feeling the boy's brittle hope cling to the air behind you. Further along, you spot a man carrying a pail of water toward a distant cottage. He avoids the wells near the centre of the village. Those are too public. Instead, he fills his bucket from a small spring near the edge of the woods, where fewer eyes will judge his destination. As he passes you, he whispers an apology to no one in particular. His hands shake. His pace quickens. You follow him with your gaze and notice something. Subtle. A cluster of cottages here with soot-darkened chimneys, yet no cooking smells drift from them. Instead, the smoke is too thin, too pale, medicinal. Someone in there is burning juniper or fir needles, herbs used to fumigate sick rooms. The smoke curls upward in wispy, uncertain spirals, as though trying to escape before anyone asks what it's doing. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your mind. Some medieval healers insisted plague could be avoided by wearing a small carved onion around your neck. You glance at a villager passing by with a suspiciously bulging pouch. You try not to laugh, mostly because he looks terrified. You step closer to one cottage whose door is barely ajar, just enough for airflow, not enough for questions. Inside you hear murmured prayers, soft, steady, almost rhythmic. Someone is reciting charms, asking for protection, promising to be better next time, promising to harvest more diligently, tidy their home more often, maybe even stop gossiping, though that last one seems unlikely. You shift your stance. The floorboard outside creaks. Immediately the murmuring stops. Someone inside whispers, "Hush." The silence that follows is thick, guarded. Then the door closes fully with the gentle finality of someone saying, "Not today. Not yet." You keep walking. The air feels heavier here, as though weighted with all the unsaid fears, and you begin to understand why villagers refuse to utter the word plague. Naming it means summoning the reeve. Summoning the reeve means seals on doors, strict quarantines, confiscated property, forced burial procedures, and no one wants to be the household that triggers that chain of events. So instead, they hide it. They call it anything else: a chill, a fever, a faintness, a touch of the bad air. But the quiet disasters have learned the game. They hide too. You approach the last cottage on the lane, where the shutters flutter slightly. Someone has wedged a cloth along the bottom edge to block draft, or to block something escaping. A low moan drifts out. You hear the rustling of straw bedding, then coughing, deep, rattling. You take a step back instinctively, not out of fear for yourself, but out of respect for the space. Medieval illness demands distance the way modern people demand Wi-Fi. As you turn away, you catch movement in the corner of your eye, a cluster of villagers watching you from behind a house. Their expressions are tense, guarded. One of them lifts a bundle of herbs to their nose, not for curing illness, but for hiding the smell of fear. You give them a small nod, the kind that says, "I understand." Because you do. This whole village is balancing on the edge of an unspoken truth, one they will avoid until they can't. And tonight, the cottagers keep their secrets. But the coughing behind the shutters tells its own quiet tale. You leave the shuttered cottages behind and follow a narrow trail that slips between two hedgerows, leading you toward the open marshland just beyond, the village fields. Out here, the air feels cooler, wetter, and strangely electric, like the atmosphere right before a thunderstorm, except the sky above you is calm and streaked with soft afternoon light. The ground squishes faintly under each step, releasing that earthy, mossy scent that always whispers, "Don't wander too far unless you enjoy mud as a lifestyle." You pause at the edge of the marsh, listening. It's quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that has opinions. Then, without warning, a pale flicker darts across your peripheral vision. You turn, but it's gone. Another flicker appears, farther out this time, hovering just above the marsh grass before disappearing again. You blink. There it is again, a small, wobbly, flame-like glow, bobbing gently near the reeds. Most villagers call these will-o'-the-wisps, though they'll tell you with a straight face that they're nothing unusual, just swamp gas or trick candles carried by elves with a questionable sense of humour. Historians still argue whether medieval people believed such lights were spirits, natural phenomena, or a sign someone nearby had eaten questionable mushrooms. You suspect it was all three, depending on who had the loudest opinion that week. Another light flares briefly, a shimmering blue-green orb that hovers for a moment before sinking low, fading into the mist like a shy performer leaving the stage. You take a tentative step closer, boots sinking just slightly in the soft mud. The villagers claim these lights guide travellers to good fortune, but always in the tone of someone who absolutely does not follow them. Ever. A shepherd approaches from behind you, his staff tapping softly against the ground. "Don't get too close," he warns, voice low. "Those lights aren't for us." You ask what he means. He shrugs. "They lead you where you don't want to go?" His sheep bleat in agreement, which honestly makes the argument feel airtight. Because here's the quiet disaster. These lights aren't magic. They're methane and other gases from decomposing plant matter, gases that ignite or glow under just the right conditions. The marsh is shifting underneath, swallowing old vegetation, releasing trapped air through unseen vents. Sometimes the lights mean the ground nearby is unstable. Sometimes it means a pocket of marsh is ready to collapse. Sometimes it means absolutely nothing except nature showing off, but no one here is willing to risk it. You walk farther along the edge, watching the lights flicker like tiny warning signals. A boy suddenly sprints from behind a thicket, chasing a chicken that escaped his yard. The chicken runs straight toward the marsh's edge. The boy lunges forward but stops short as a patch of ground ripples unnervingly beneath his foot. The chicken, who seems to know more about survival than the entire village combined, veers away and escapes unharmed. The boy stares at the trembling mud, pale and shaking. He mutters, "Didn't see that," and scampers away. You continue along the marsh, noticing the way certain sections bubble quietly, small circles of air rising to the surface, popping with soft plinks. You crouch to observe. The mud here looks solid enough, but when you touch it with your fingertip, it wobbles like medieval pudding. The earth is shifting from beneath. Pockets of decay are forming caverns just inches below the surface. It's the land's equivalent of whispering, "Don't trust me today." A quirky tidbit flits into your mind. Some medieval villagers believed that marsh lights were the souls of unbaptized children trying to lure travellers into the afterlife. Others blamed mischievous fae. One group insisted the lights came from witches practicing night spells, mainly because blaming witches was medieval Europe's version of turning the Wi-Fi off and on again to fix every problem. As you approach a fallen willow tree, you spot a cluster of villagers gathered a short distance away. They're whispering intensely, pointing toward a faint glow deeper in the marsh. One man shakes his head violently. Another woman grips a charm around her neck, wooden, carved with a simple spiral. A third mutters, "It's the sign again." You watch quietly as they avoid stepping closer. You don't need to ask what happened. The way they're standing says enough. Someone wandered too far recently. Someone misread a light. Someone isn't home right now, but no one will say it out loud. You move on, watching the mist swirl low around your ankles. Every so often, a cold spot grazes your skin, leaving goosebumps in its wake. You glance up to see another light, this one brighter, lingering just long enough to make you wonder if it's actually drifting toward you. You take a step back, slowly, respectfully. The marsh lights don't chase people, but sometimes people chase them. You follow the path until it curves back towards solid ground, where the grass thickens and the earth stops shifting beneath your weight. The villagers up ahead walk with more confidence, glancing only briefly toward the marsh as if they owe it taxes. You take one last look over your shoulder. A faint glow flickers in the distance, soft, wavering, almost beautiful. And beneath that quiet shimmer lies the truth the villagers won't name. The marsh is changing, encroaching, hiding its dangers behind lights that dance like secrets. The kind of danger that doesn't roar, it winks. You follow the winding path away from the marsh until the land begins to rise again, the soil turning firmer beneath your boots. Ahead lies the broad, gently sloped meadow that separates the village from the slow-moving river. At a glance, everything looks calm, quiet, sunlit, perfectly ordinary. Birds skim low over the grass. A pair of children chase each other with sticks pretending to be swords. A dog rolls in something questionable and deeply committed to its choices. But as you approach the meadows, lowest dip, the ground grows damp underfoot. Not marsh damp, something different, something steady. The earth feels saturated, the way a sponge does when it's pretending it has one more drop of capacity left. You pause, testing the soil with the heel of your boot. Water seeps up immediately, forming a thin, glimmering pool around the edge of your footprint. That's when you realize the flood they've been ignoring all year is making its quiet return. Upstream, the river is swollen, just a little, just enough. Snowmelt from distant hills, a season of unpredictable rain, and the gradual erosion of riverbanks have all conspired to push the waterline farther into the meadow. But the villagers, they insist everything is fine. They insist this is normal seasonal dampness, spoken with the same confidence they use to insist their hayloft doesn't have rats. A farmer trudges past carrying a bundle of willow shoots. He glances at the water pooling around your boots, shrugs with masterful denial and says, "Ground's always been a bit moist this time of year." You glance down at the creeping waterline currently swallowing a fence post like it's taking a deliberate bite. Moist. Sure. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers genuinely believed slow floods were harmless, or whether they simply couldn't afford to think otherwise. Because once you admit the land is sinking and the river is expanding, you're forced to answer questions like, where will the animals go? How much crop will we lose? Who's telling the Lord? And how much tax will he add when he hears about it? And those are questions nobody here wants to invite into their brain. You walk farther, feeling the ground slosh with each step. A line of stones marks where the meadow used to stay dry year-round. Now half those stones are underwater, their tops barely visible beneath rippling reflections. You crouch, dipping your hand into the shallow water. It's cold, colder than it should be for this season. That means groundwater is rising too. The river isn't the only culprit. A soft plip draws your attention. A fish, an actual fish, flashes briefly just beyond the submerged stones. You blink. This meadow is definitely not supposed to have fish in it. A few geese honk indignantly at the intrusion. The fish flicks its tail as if saying, "Take it up with the river." You move to higher ground, watching the way the water creeps slowly, silently, a fingertip of the river stretching farther inland each week. You spot a small shed sitting crookedly at the meadow's edge. Its door is slightly open, revealing the bottom of a wooden chest floating gently on pooled water. Someone has tried to wedge stones under the walls to lift it, but the stones have sunk. A woman nearby picks wet straw out of a basket and mutters under her breath, "Just a wet spring." Then she slams the basket down with the force of someone who doesn't want witnesses. A quirky tidbit drifts into, "Your mind." Some medieval communities believed that creeping floods were signs that a river spirit was displeased. With what no one ever agreed. Too much fishing? Not enough ritual offerings? A mill wheel installed at the wrong angle? When in doubt, blame spirits. It's easier than blaming the climate or bad engineering. You follow the riverbank, noticing how the once sturdy embankment now slumps outward, like the river has been pushing against it for months, and it finally sighed and said, "Fine, have it your way." Roots of nearby trees jut out from the soil, exposed, desperately clinging. The water laps against them gently, too gently. The kind of gentleness that says, "I'll be back for more." A man with a rake approaches, poking the bank experimentally. The rake sinks deeper than he expects, and his eyebrows shoot upward. He immediately pulls the rake back and pretends nothing happened, whistling loudly as he walks away. Medieval denial is a powerful force. Farther along you reach a small wooden bridge spanning a narrow branch of the river. The bridge sags in the centre, its supports darkened with moisture. You step onto it cautiously. It groans, softly like an old man complaining about his knees. You test another plank. It springs up water like a sponge someone squeezed too eagerly. Someone has laid a fresh board across the middle, an attempt at repair, but the nails are already rusting. You cross anyway, feeling the wood flex beneath you. The river murmurs underneath, almost sympathetic. Or hungry, hard to tell. On the other side, you encounter 3 villagers arguing. One insists the meadow has always been like this. Another swears the waterline was 5 paces farther last summer. The third just wants to move the sheep before they learn how to swim. They all turn to you as if expecting a verdict. You shrug. They groan collectively and return to arguing. You climb a small rise, turning to survey the meadow from a vantage point. From up here, the creeping flood is unmistakable. Long fingers of water extending into grazing land, puddles merging into shallow pools, reeds sprouting where grass once stood. And the villagers? They simply skirt around the wet patches. They move their tools a few feet at a time. They keep their voices light and cheerful, as though the flood won't matter as long as they don't talk about it. But you notice the truth in the quiet details. The sinking fence posts, the drowned stones, the fish where no fish should be, the cold water rising from beneath, not above. This disaster doesn't roar in with storm clouds or crashing waves. It arrives slowly, quietly, politely, like a guest no one invited, but no one dares ask to leave. You leave the meadow behind, shaking off the cold dampness from your boots as you follow a narrow path leading into the tree line at the village's edge. The forest has always been part of the landscape, steady, familiar, a dependable source of firewood, berries, and the occasional moment of terror when a squirrel decides to leap dramatically across your field of vision. But as you step closer, you notice something subtle and unsettling. The trees are closer than they used to be. Not dramatically. Not, wake up and the forest has swallowed your house close. More like, that root wasn't there last year, and that shadow seems about 6 feet farther forward than memory suggests. Medieval villagers wouldn't say it out loud, but you can feel it. The forest is quietly creeping inward. You brush your hand against a birch trunk at the edge of the clearing. The bark is new growth smooth, meaning the tree is young, much younger than the others around it. These saplings have taken root aggressively, thriving in the slightly wetter soil left behind by the creeping flood. You glance around and see more of them, a whole line of young trees forming a sneaky advance guard. No one in the village has mentioned it, but the forest. It's expanding by inches like a polite intruder. A middle-aged woman carrying a basket of twigs approaches the path. You point out the saplings. She barely glances at them before saying, "Forests grow. It's what they do, in the same tone people use when pretending taxes don't bother them. Then she speed walks away, basket bouncing against her hip. Denial is clearly this villager's favourite sport. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers understood long-term ecological shifts, like subtle climate change or soil saturation encouraging woodland growth. Some believed forests expanded because spirits decided to claim land. Others thought it was the sign of a lazy woodcutter not doing his job. You suspect it's all of the above blended with a dash of, we have bigger problems. You step under the canopy, where the air grows cooler and dimmer. Light filters through the leaves in shifting patterns that look suspiciously like they're following you. Though, realistically, it's more likely the breeze. Probably. Hopefully. The forest floor is thick with moss, fresh, bright green, spongy beneath your feet. Too spongy. You crouch, pressing your fingers into it. The moss has taken advantage of the damp conditions, spreading faster than villagers can clear it. You notice how the soil rises in small mounds around roots that push outward with slow determination, like elbows nudging into new territory. Then you hear it, a soft creaking ahead. Not the ominous creaking of collapsing structures this time, more like a tree leaning outward, adjusting itself. You follow the sound until you reach an oak whose trunk angles slightly toward the village. It's nothing dramatic, but it's not subtle either. The oak leans with intent. A young boy collecting firewood stops beside you, staring up at the oak. His brow furrows. That tree wasn't that crooked last week, Stas, right? You raise an eyebrow. He quickly shakes his head. Nope. Definitely always been like that. He grabs his bundle and sprints away, eager to outrun responsibility. You wander deeper, noticing faint trails carved into the undergrowth. Deer paths, boar paths, fox trails, all shifting slightly toward village territory. As the forest expands, the animals follow, which means night noises villagers once heard at a comfortable distance now whisper closer, rustling against fences, leaving prints under windows. Another quiet disaster, padded in fur. A quirky tidbit surfaces. In medieval Europe, some people believed forests walked during the night, literally walked, shifting roots and branches to reclaim land stolen by humans. One legend said trees moved so slowly that no one could ever witness it, yet fast enough to take a whole pasture in a generation. You look around, half amused, half uneasy. Slow or not, the forest certainly feels like it has opinions. As you step over a fallen log, your boot catches on a creeping vine, and not an accidental catch. The vine has twisted across the path with purpose, as though mapping a route. You steady yourself and spot half a dozen more vines, slinking outward from the underbrush. It's subtle, but undeniable. The forest is growing toward the village in quiet, persistent increments. You reach a small clearing where 3 villagers stand around a stump, arguing in hushed tones. The boundary markers are off again, one mutters. Nonsense, says another. Someone probably moved them. Who? The third demands. The deer? The trees? They all fall silent, glancing nervously at the surrounding trunks. Their argument instantly changes direction. Well, maybe the wind did it, someone offers. Yes, the wind, another agrees quickly. Because blaming weather is far less frightening than admitting the land itself is shifting. You leave them behind and follow a narrow game trail where pine needles create a soft cushion under your steps. You notice how the trees are taller here, denser. Their branches interlock above your head, dimming the light to a cool dusk even though it's still midday. Shafts of sunlight break through in thin beams, but each one feels more like a spotlight than a comfort. Near the edge of this darker patch, you find something odd. A wooden boundary post half sunken into the soil, leaning heavily toward the village. Moss creeps up its sides. The carved mark, once crisp, is blurred by moisture. You brush away the moss, revealing that the ground around the post is slightly lower than the rest, as though the earth has been pulled subtly in the forest's direction. You step back, realizing what's happening. The combination of shifting groundwater, expanding undergrowth, and a slight warming in seasonal cycles is encouraging the forest to reclaim land year by year. Nothing dramatic enough to force action, but enough to shrink farmland, press wildlife closer, and make villagers whisper at night when they hear unfamiliar rustles behind their homes. Another faint creak echoes, this time behind you. You turn to see a sapling bent under its own newly gained height, its top brushing against the outermost cottage fence. A woman exits the cottage, sees the sapling, frowns and mutters, "Not again," before hacking at it with a small axe. Not to uproot it, just to trim the top. Because actually removing it would mean admitting the forest keeps creeping closer, and admitting that means the whole village will have to talk about solutions. And talking about solutions? That might force them to face the quiet disaster they've been tiptoeing around for years. You retreat to the path, listening as the wind rustles through branches that were not here a decade ago, some not even 5 years ago. The forest sighs, as if pleased with its progress, and you realize something simple but terrifying. This village thinks the forest is still where it used to be. But the trees have been inching forward, breathing, growing, claiming. Not with roaring storms or crashing trunks, but quietly, relentlessly. One little root at a time, you leave the whispering forest behind, stepping back into the open lane leading toward the heart of the village. At first, the air feels lighter here. Fewer shadows, more sunlight. That comforting warmth of people going about their routines. But then you notice it. A faint scurrying sound beneath the nearest cart. Not dramatic, not alarming, just busy. Purposeful. Too purposeful. You pause. Wait. Listen. There it is again. Tiny claws tapping across hard-packed dirt, followed by the soft rustle of something squeezing into a gap it shouldn't logically fit through. Oh no. Rats. Of course it's rats. And of course the villagers pretend not to see them. A woman carrying a tray of dough bustles past you. She spots a rat dart across the lane, squeaks in alarm, then immediately clears her throat and mutters, "Just a squirrel." That was absolutely not a squirrel. Squirrels do not move like secrets. They move like caffeine incarnate. Another rat scurries along the edge of a cottage wall, its tail whipping behind it. A man sweeping his doorstep stares directly at it, and then continues sweeping his completely clean doorway as though the rat were a figment of your imagination. His broom strokes become aggressively enthusiastic, the universal medieval sign for "I didn't see that and you didn't either." You follow the rat's path until it disappears into a crack near the granary. Ah, perfect. The granary, where grain is stored, where sacks sit in perfect chewable rows, where rats hold midnight banquets like tiny furry aristocrats. A faint squeaking rises from inside, multiple squeaks, layers of squeaks, a chorus of denial-worthy squeaks. The villagers hear it. You can tell by the way several pause mid-step, stiffen just slightly, then continue walking with the determination of people pretending their ears do not function. Historians still argue whether medieval communities genuinely underestimated rat problems, or whether they simply lacked the emotional capacity to add rodent infestation to their already overwhelming daily checklist. Considering this village's track record with quiet disasters, you suspect both explanations are simultaneously correct. You walk toward the grain store's side door. It's propped open with a stone, likely for ventilation, but also likely because the latch has given up its will to live. Inside, you hear the soft rustle of movement. You step in slowly. Grain sacks line the walls, many patched and retied multiple times. A few are pristine near the top but sagging suspiciously at the bottom, and one at the far end, wiggles slightly. It shakes again, then stops. You stare. The sack stares back, with absolute silence. You take one more step and a rat pokes its head out of a hole near the bottom. It looks at you with a mix of suspicion, and, "This is my house now." Then it vanishes back inside the sack, its whole body rustling inside the grain as though rearranging furniture. You turn and nearly bump into the granary keeper. He smiles stiffly. "All in order here," he says, as a rat darts behind him like a streak of animated shadow. He freezes, then continues speaking louder now. Perfectly normal. A second rat slips out beneath a broken floorboard. A third peeks from behind a barrel. The keeper deliberately looks at the ceiling. To be fair, medieval villages weren't strangers to rodents. They expected them, tolerated them, saw them as just another part of life, like taxes or mysterious coughs or roofs that occasionally creaked ominously. But this is more than usual. This is a quiet infestation. A quirky tidbit floats back to you. Some villagers believed rats were drawn to sinful households. If rats seemed especially present, it meant someone nearby needed spiritual improvement. Based on the rat volume here, This entire granary might be a theological disaster. You exit the building before the rats start requesting rent. Outside, a young girl is scattering grain scraps for chickens. Except the chickens aren't the ones who come running. 3 rats appear first, whiskers twitching like they're auditioning for a medieval cooking show. The girl freezes, then looks around to make sure no adult saw. She kicks lightly toward the rats, not to hit them, just to maintain dignity. The rats scatter into a nearby woodpile. The woodpile wiggles suspiciously for several seconds afterward. You watch another villager lift a bucket near the livestock pens. A rat skitters out from underneath and zips under a trough. He startles, jumps so high he nearly drops the bucket, then casually clears his throat and mutters, "Just a big mouse." That mouse was the size of his shoe. You walk past the baker's hut. Outside the back door, flour dust is scattered across the ground. Little paw prints trail through it like incriminating evidence. You crouch to inspect them. A thin line of flour leads beneath a raised stone near the oven wall. A faint squeak echoes from underneath. The baker's wife appears in the doorway, sees your expression, and shakes her head vigorously. "Birds," she insists. You gesture to the paw prints. "Very talented birds," she corrects. Historians still debate whether medieval villagers understood the connection between rats and disease before the major outbreaks. Some argue they didn't recognize rats as carriers. Others believe they suspected the link but didn't want to confirm it. Considering the way these villagers are ignoring rodent trails so clear they might as well spell out "hello" in flour, you lean toward the second theory. You continue along the lane where the houses cluster closer. Under one windowsill you see a rat grooming itself calmly, as though it's preparing for a small interview. A man passing by tosses it half a crust of bread. "For the cat?" you ask. He smiles. Yes, for the cat." There is no cat. Near the edge of the village you spot something unsettling. A collapsed burrow near a chicken coop. Dozens of tiny tracks surround it. The chickens huddle in a defensive group, glaring at the coop door like it betrayed them personally. A quiet disaster, crawling through cracks, nibbling through sacks, breeding in corners, spreading subtly, steadily, inevitably. The villagers don't speak of it. They don't point. They don't even whisper. Because admitting rats are everywhere means admitting what rats bring. And there's a sickness already hiding in shuttered cottages. One quiet disaster at a time is all this village can emotionally handle. You take one last look at a rat darting under a cottage step. It pauses, looks back at you, as though acknowledging you're the only one actually paying attention. Then it vanishes into another shadow, in a village pretending the shadows have nothing inside them at all. You wander back toward the centre of the village, your attention drifting upward now instead of down. After rats and rivers and creeping forests, you'd think the ground is the only thing you need to worry about. But tonight, the danger is above you. Rooflines tilt at odd angles, chimneys lean like they've had one drink too many, and beams jut from under sagging thatch like tired shoulders poking through old clothes. You stop before one cottage and really look at it. Not the way villagers look, fast, sideways with emotional sunglasses on, but properly. The thatch is patchy near the ridge, tufts sticking out like bad hair after a rough sleep. The main beam supporting the roof has bowed ever so slightly, just enough for the eye to sense something. Wrong, even if the mind rushes to reassure you. It's always been like that. It hasn't, of course. Wood doesn't naturally grow in the "I'm fine, really" shape. You step closer and notice a crude prop wedged beneath the eave. An old cart axle, pressed against the wall at an angle, its base braced with stones, is not a proper repair, it's a stool. A way of saying, "Please, roof, hold on just one more winter." Medieval houses were not just homes, they were also symbols of status. Admitting your roof was failing wasn't just inconvenient, it was embarrassing. Repairing beams cost money, labour, and often required help from neighbours who would absolutely gossip about the state of your rafters. Inside, you hear the muffled rhythm of daily life, pots clinking, someone humming off-key, the creak of a chair shifting on an uneven floor. Overhead, the roof creaks back, like an old man commenting on all of it. You imagine the family sitting beneath those leaning beams, pretending they don't hear the complaint in the wood. You duck into the low doorway when you're invited in by a harried mother carrying a bowl of dough. The interior smells of smoke, flour, and a hint of damp timber. You glance up and immediately notice the main support beam running across the room. It sags in the middle like it's carrying the whole weight of the village's problems and isn't quite sure it signed up for that. Someone has nailed a smaller plank under it. Thin, warped, clearly too short for the job. They've wrapped rope around both pieces as if tying them together will convince gravity to take the day off. You reach up and tap the wood lightly. It answers with a dull, tired sound. The woman catches you looking. "It's quite strong," she says quickly. "My father built this beam himself." You nod. He probably did. But that was when the beam hadn't been absorbing decades of smoke, damp, and occasional minor floods. Historians still argue whether medieval people underestimated the long-term impact of smoke and moisture on wooden structures, or whether they simply lived with the constant awareness that everything was temporary: roofs, walls, barns, entire villages. Either way, they rarely tore down and rebuilt fully. They patched, propped, and prayed. You can see all three strategies in this one beam. A small boy runs through the room, chasing a scrap of cloth like it's a heroic banner. As he passes under the sagging beam, he instinctively ducks his head even though he has plenty of clearance. That's how you know the roof has been slowly lowering itself for years. People have adjusted their bodies to match it without even realizing. You move to the back of the room where another support pole stands, angled slightly, its base sitting on a flat stone that has sunk into the floor. Someone has wedged a shard of pottery under one side to correct the tilt. This whole house is being held together by stubbornness, improvisation, and about 3 items you'd normally find in a rubbish heap. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some medieval households believed knocking on beams kept evil spirits from settling in the wood. Maybe that's where the modern superstition comes from. You picture villagers gently tapping their rafters, hoping to keep not just bad luck away, but actual collapse. You thank the family and step back outside into the lane, where the problem suddenly appears everywhere. One cottage has a visible twist in the roofline, the thatch dipping like a smile gone crooked. Another has extra posts along the outer wall, temporary braces that have mysteriously become permanent. A third shows fresh plaster over a crack that runs from the foundation all the way to the eave. The plaster's trying its best. The crack is winning. Over by the blacksmith's place, you notice a long beam laid out on trestles, half-shaped, half abandoned. The blacksmith himself stands nearby, hammer resting on his shoulder, staring at it with the haunted expression of someone doing structural math in his head. He knows that beam is supposed to go into someone's roof. He also knows the person can't pay yet. "Just waiting for the right time," he mutters when he catches you looking. The right time, you suspect, is after it collapses, but before anyone gets crushed. Medieval timing is all about threading that particular needle. You wander toward the church, the tallest building in the village, and glance up at its rafters. Even here, in a structure meant to inspire awe and stability, you see small signs of strain. Darkened joints, slightly bowed trusses, a faint gap where 2 beams no longer sit flush. The villagers gather under this ceiling every week, praying for protection while standing beneath timber that creaks ominously every time the wind picks up. Faith and carpentry meet in an uneasy partnership. You run a hand over a supporting column inside, feeling grooves where countless hands have done the same. Near the top, small wooden wedges have been hammered in, discreet, almost hidden. Someone has been quietly adjusting, tightening, buying time. The church must stand, everything else can wobble, but this building must hold. Still, you feel the faint shiver when a gust rattles the roof. The walls swallow the sound, but your bones remember it. Back in the lane, you overhear 2 men talking near a barn whose roofline dips like an overfilled mattress. "She'll last the winter," one says. The other snorts. "That's what you said last winter." They both glance at the beam above the door, split along one edge, reinforced with an iron band that's starting to rust. Neither of them suggests replacing it. That idea is so big it doesn't even fit in the conversation. You step inside the barn and look up. Light filters through small gaps where the thatch has thinned. Beams crisscross overhead, some solid, some scarred by old leaks. You can see how one failure at the top would cascade, downward, pulling everything with it. This building is a wooden web, every piece leaning on every other. The animals shift in their stalls, hooves clopping softly, oblivious to the physics lesson above. A cow flicks its tail, unconcerned. Animals live perfectly in the present. Humans, on the other hand, live in the dangerous middle ground between what they know and what they admit. You leave the barn, stepping back into the village that now feels like it has a second, invisible landscape. Not just earth and buildings, but stresses and strains, silent angles and quiet, sagging lines. This place isn't falling apart dramatically. It's slowly giving way in the beams and braces, the places everyone pretends are still as strong as they were on the day they were raised. The roofs don't collapse, not yet. They just sink a little lower each year, and everyone learns to walk with slightly more careful steps underneath them. You step away from the sagging roofs and creaking beams, following the dirt path that winds past the last row of cottages toward the livestock pens. The air changes here, warmer, muskier, carrying the unmistakable scent of animals and all the joys they bring to your nose. Normally, this part of the village feels lively. Cows mooing in complaint, pigs grunting like philosophical old men, chickens providing constant commentary. But today, the soundscape is different, quieter, hesitant. You slow your pace. Animals don't hide their problems the way humans do. When they're sick, they show it. They stop eating, they shiver, they lie down more than usual. They make strange noises you instantly know are wrong. And right now, the livestock pens hum with a strange silence, broken only by the occasional cough from something that absolutely should not be coughing. You approach the first pen, normally home to a proud pair of dairy cows. One cow stands near the gate, chewing slowly, jaw working as if every bite is a negotiation. The other lies in the straw, head low, breath coming out in soft, uneven huffs. A man stands beside her, stroking her neck. His smile when he notices you is way too bright. "She's just tired," he says. You both look at the cow. The cow wheezes. He repeats, louder this time, "Just tired." Right. Medieval villagers treat tired like a cure-all diagnosis. You crouch beside the fence, watching the cow's flank rise and fall. Too fast, too shallow. A fever, clearly. Maybe lung sickness, maybe something worse. The farmer knows it too. You can see that knowledge in the way he keeps glancing around, making sure no one else sees him worried. Livestock illness was no small matter. A single sick cow could doom a family's supply of milk, butter, cheese, essential staples. Worse, losing an animal could trigger taxes or penalties from the Lord, since livestock counted toward a household's wealth. And if the reeve discovered an outbreak spreading through pens, quarantine, fines, forced culling. No one wants that. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers feared livestock disease more than human disease. Considering the look in the farmer's eyes right now, it's a tough call. You rise and move toward the next pen, where a handful of pigs root around listlessly. Normally pigs act like they're auditioning for chaotic circus roles, but these ones move slow, ears sagging. One snorts weakly, lifts its head, and then lets it droop again. You watch it wobble on its legs. That's not normal wobbling. That's, "I've made poor life choices and may faint," wobbling. A young girl scatters scraps into the pen. None of the pigs rush over. She frowns, calls to them cheerfully, too cheerfully, and when they don't respond, she kicks dirt angrily at nothing. Then she looks up at you and says, "They're full." You both stare at the pigs, who are absolutely not full. She repeats, "They're very full." You nod politely. Everyone here is committed to pretending nothing is wrong. You walk toward the goat pen next. Goats, the village's drama queens, escape artists, and general agents of chaos. Except today, they're quiet. One rests its chin on the fence, staring at you with watery eyes. Another stands stiffly, ears drooping like wilted leaves. A third coughs. Goats do not cough. If a goat is coughing, the universe has become personally concerned. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Medieval people believed goats were immune to many illnesses because they ate everything, including supposedly poisonous plants. But that immunity was wildly exaggerated, and diseases like pox, worm infestations, and fevers hit goats harder than legends admitted. You reach out. The goat presses its head against your hand with a tired sigh. Just then, a villager hurries forward, practically throwing himself between you and the pen. "They're resting," he insists. Resting is quickly becoming the village's least helpful medical term. You continue walking, sensing eyes watching you from behind barn doors and wooden slats. Villagers linger near their animals, whispering, checking for symptoms they claim not to see. A woman wipes sweat from a horse's flank, though the day is cool. The horse's coat is dull, its stance stiff. Another man slips a cloth over a chicken coop window, hiding a hen whose head droops like a wilted flower. As you pass, you overhear a quiet argument. "We should tell the reeve." "No." "But what if it spreads?" "It won't, it's just a chill." "A chill doesn't make sheep bleed." "Shh." You pause. Sheep bleeding, nose, mouth or hooves, is a sign of several medieval livestock illnesses, some mild, others catastrophic. The tone in their voices tells you they know exactly which one they're afraid of. You approach the sheepfold cautiously. The woolly bodies huddle closer than normal. Sheep cluster when frightened, cold, or unwell. And today, they are absolutely not cold. One ewe stands apart from the rest, her breathing laboured, a faint stain under her nostrils. A boy kneels beside her, wiping gently with a cloth. He startles when he notices you but smiles bravely. "She'll be better by tomorrow," he says. Behind him, an older woman shakes her head almost imperceptibly. Her hands tremble. The fear here is different from the fear of plague in humans. This fear carries real material consequences. You lose a family member, and the village mourns with you. You lose an ox. You may not plant next season's field. You lose 2 pigs. Say goodbye to winter meat. You lose a cow and a goat. That's months of milk gone, butter gone, cheese gone. Livestock illness isn't just sickness, it's survival unravelling. A faint hum draws your attention to the far end of the pens, where smoke lifts from a small fire. You walk toward it and find a man burning straw slowly, letting the smoke drift over his animals. About fumigation attempt. He glances at you with embarrassed defiance. "Just clearing bad air," he mutters. You nod. Bad air. A common medieval explanation for all manner of ailments. Sometimes they were wrong. Sometimes they were accidentally right. Historians still debate whether miasma theory helped or hurt medieval communities. On one hand, burning herbs and keeping pens ventilated improved air quality. On the other, it didn't treat the cause. Nearby, you see a bucket of water tinted with herbs, yarrow, comfrey, maybe garlic. Someone has been forcing sick animals to drink it. A goat knocks the bucket over in mild protest. The herbal water runs across the ground and pools near the corner of the pen. You step back and survey the livestock area. Everywhere, subtle signs, ribs more visible, bodies moving slower, eyes duller, voices quieter, and over everything the heavy veil of denial, because to acknowledge the sickness would be to admit its cost, its danger, its implications. These animals are the village's lifeline. If they fail, the village fails. So villagers whisper, soothe, hide symptoms, burn herbs, and pretend. One quiet disaster at a time is all they can handle, but this one has hooves and fur and hollow breaths, and it's standing right beside them. You leave the livestock pens with their heavy silence and make your way toward the edge of the village where the air always smells different. Even on a good day, the tannery announces itself long before you see it. Today, though, the scent hits you like a warm, damp handshake from someone you'd rather not meet. Thick, sour, sharp around the edges, a smell with opinions. You follow the dirt path until the trees thin and the tannery appears. A squat collection of wooden vats, drying racks, and smoke-blackened sheds perched beside a stream that absolutely did not volunteer for this job. The ground around it is stained dark from decades of runoff, and the air hums faintly with buzzing flies. Tiny winged judges circling the truth villagers pretend not to notice. A tanner stands over one of the vats, stirring it with a long wooden pole. The liquid sloshes thickly, opaque and murky. You catch a whiff of something aggressively unpleasant. He looks up, sees you wrinkle your nose, and immediately laughs. A loud, forced, heroic laugh. "Smells like money," he declares. "It smells like medieval disaster soup." You step closer, cautiously. The man's boots are caked in layers of residue, dried hides, stray hair, and other things you decide not to identify. He notices your hesitation and waves a dismissive hand. "Just the usual work. Leather doesn't make itself." Leather tanning in the Middle Ages was infamous for its stench. Hides were soaked in lime, urine, animal dung, and other fragrant substances. Even so, something here smells off. Not just strong, wrong. Sour in a way that suggests rot where there shouldn't be rot. The kind of smell that says something is leaking, pooling, festering. You walk along the row of vats, peering into one at random. The surface bubbles occasionally. small bursts that release even more formidable aromas. The tanner notices and quickly interjects, "Healthy batch, very healthy." His voice cracks on the second "healthy." A faint trickle of liquid runs from the far side of the work area into the stream, a dark, almost oily ribbon. Villagers pass near it without looking, their eyes trained on the horizon or the sky, or literally anything else. To acknowledge the filth seeping into their water would require confronting a dozen uncomfortable truths at once, so they keep walking. Historians still argue whether medieval tanneries were located downstream because villagers understood the contamination risk, or simply because the smell made people argue with their own shadows. Either way, the stream here has transformed into a chemical cocktail of old hides and mystery fluids. You kneel at the water's edge. The once clear stream is cloudy, milkiness drifting along the surface like ghostly fingerprints. A discarded scrap of hide floats lazily by, bumping into a reed before drifting off again. A frog leaps from the bank, lands in the water, and immediately regrets its choices, scrambling out with record speed. A child skips across the path behind you, holding a stick and humming. She pauses at the stream, eyes narrowing. "It's not usually that colour," she mutters. Before you can respond, her mother swoops in from nowhere, grabs her arm and says brightly, "Let's go, sweetheart. Fresh air today." Dragging her away from the stream that very much does not contain fresh anything. You walk toward the drying racks where hides stretch taut in the sun. Some look normal, smooth, drying as expected. Others, odd blotches, discoloured patches, places where the skin looks like it's melting. The tanner notices your interest and quickly steps in front of the worst hides. "Experimental batch," he claims. You tilt your head. "With new techniques." You tilt your head further. "Ancient techniques," he tries. He gives up and mumbles, "The vats got too warm last week." You look up at the sky. The air is cool. The vats did not get too warm. Something else is wrong. Something in the chemicals, the mixture, the runoff, the hides themselves. Perhaps the animals were sick. Perhaps the water they used was contaminated. Perhaps both. You wander around the back of the tannery, where broken vats lean like defeated soldiers. Here the smell intensifies into a wall of scent. Sharp, sour, rotten. A thick sludge seeps down a small slope toward the main path. Someone has tried to block it with straw. The straw is losing the battle quickly. A man hauling firewood passes by. He notices you gawking and shrugs. "That's not our problem," he says. You gesture to the sludge leaking toward a walkway. "Well, it's not my problem," he corrects before walking faster. A quirky tidbit flutters into your mind. Some medieval people believed tannery waste could cure skin diseases if applied correctly. Others thought it caused the diseases in the first place. One chronicler even wrote that if a village smelled too strongly of tannery fumes, the angels avoided that place for a season. Honestly, standing here, you wouldn't blame them. You circle back toward the main yard where the tanner's apprentice is struggling to lift a slippery hide from a vat. The hide flops back in with a slap, sending a small splash onto his tunic. He grimaces, less from disgust, more from resignation. "It stains," he warns you softly. "Does it wash out?" He shakes his head slowly. "Not really." You glance at his arms. The older stains tell their own story. Shades of brown and grey and something that might once have been yellow. Some patches are roughened, irritated. Contact dermatitis from tannery chemicals was common. Apprentices often sacrificed their health alongside their dignity. A cart rolls by carrying more hides. One slips off the side, landing in the dirt. The tanner rushes forward, scoops it up, examines the underside. His lips tighten. You know that look. Rot. Internal damage. A hide that won't tan properly. Worthless. But he tosses it onto the rack anyway, hoping no one will notice until it's already been sold. You hear footsteps and turn to see a trio of villagers approaching. They're carrying a broken stool, hoping to trade for a leather patch. As they enter the tannery yard, their noses wrinkle in unison. One woman, trying to be polite, breathes through her sleeve. The tanner beams at them. "Lovely day for work," he says. They nod with the air of people who absolutely disagree. You step aside and watch as the tanner rummages for scraps, hiding the worst hides behind better ones. He doesn't want them to see the blotches, the rot, the waste sliding slowly into the stream behind him. The village doesn't need another problem. They certainly don't need a quiet disaster involving the water supply, the leather trade, and their own health. So the tanner hides the faults, the villagers pretend not to smell the truth, and the stream keeps swallowing what no one will admit exists. You step back, letting the tannery re-immerse itself in its pungent silence. In this village, even the smells tell stories, and most of those stories are the ones people are trying very, very hard not to hear. You leave the tannery with its stubborn stench clinging to your cloak like a determined houseguest and walk toward the village centre again, where the lanes twist around cottages and workshops. The air improves, slightly, but something else begins to slip into your senses. A faint, sour, sweet aroma drifting from open windows, the smell of baking bread, normally delightful, comforting, a universal medieval everything is going to be fine scent. Except tonight, something's off. You follow your nose toward the baker's cottage, where a wooden peel sticks out of the doorway and a small crowd gathers to collect their loaves. People chat in soft voices, smiling with the brittle courtesy of villagers, pretending absolutely nothing is wrong. But the moment the first loaf comes out, you see it. The crust is darker than usual, blotchy in places, almost bruised looking. The baker beams proudly. Fresh from the oven! A woman takes a loaf, sniffs discreetly, and her face twitches. Smells hearty, she says, forcing a smile that looks like it's holding back a scream. The baker nods enthusiastically. New batch of grain! He absolutely does not mention the mouldy sacks you saw earlier in the granary. You wait until the crowd thins and step closer. Another loaf emerges, this one slightly warped, with a faint purplish undertone visible near the edges. You inhale. The smell is fine, but not fine. A little sharp, a little metallic, a little, don't think too hard about this, ergot. You've seen it before, those dark kernels hiding in damp grain, the kind villagers often grind right into the flour because removing them takes time they don't have, and honesty they can't risk. Ergot fungus doesn't always cause problems. Sometimes it sleeps quietly in the dough. Other times, it wakes up inside someone's bloodstream like a chaotic houseguest, causing everything from tingling limbs to nightmarish visions. Medieval people didn't know the biochemical details. They just knew sometimes the bread made people see things. Historians still argue whether certain medieval witch panics were triggered by outbreaks of ergot poisoning rather than actual sorcery. You watch the baker slice open a test loaf. Steam rises. The crumb is soft, but there it is. Faint streaks. Slightly greyish-purple veins running through like bruised marbling. He sees it. He definitely sees it. And then, with the speed of a seasoned liar, he flips the loaf upside down. Perfect texture, he announces. The loaf thuds on the cutting board in a tone that says, something inside me is tired. You take a piece when he offers it. You hold it, weighing it thoughtfully. To eat or not to eat. You choose not to eat. Your survival instincts aren't medievally compromised. A child runs up, reaching eagerly for a loaf. His mother stops him with a firm hand. Wait, she whispers, eyeing the bread. He whines. Wait, she repeats, the childlike tone gone from her voice. Beside the oven, you spot a discarded loaf with a strange green speckling along the crust. Someone tried to hide it under a cloth. It did not hide well. A chicken pecks at it once, shakes its head violently, and walks away with offended dignity. You step around to the back of the bakery and peek through a cracked shutter. Inside, the baker's wife kneads dough at a frantic pace. Her hands move like she's trying to outrun her own thoughts. A pile of flour beside her sits clumped and slightly damp. She pauses, stares at it, then whispers something that sounds like, "Please be good enough." Beside her, a small bowl of herbs sits ready. Baking herbs are normal, but these are stronger. Not just flavour, these are meant to hide bitter notes, to mask strange tastes, to disguise the fact that something in the dough is making itself known. You step back as someone approaches the doorway carrying a basket of yesterday's unsold loaves. Some loaves look normal, others not so normal. One is warped like a half-deflated balloon. Another has a strange concave centre, as if the dough collapsed mid-bake. The carrier sets the basket outside, sighs and mutters, "Feed it to the pigs." Except the pigs, as you saw earlier, are sick. You realise the uncomfortable truth. The cycle is looping. Bad grain, bad bread, bad livestock, worse grain. Quiet disasters don't appear in isolation. They feed each other. You walk back into the lane and notice a man biting into his fresh loaf. His expression shifts from delight to confusion. He frowns, blinks. "Bread tastes strange today," he murmurs. His wife elbows him sharply. "Tastes fine," she hisses. He nods quickly. "Yes, fine." You continue walking and the symptoms reveal themselves in subtle ways. A woman rubbing her forearms like they're buzzing. A man blinking repeatedly as though shadows look wrong. A teenager giggling at nothing while staring too intently at a puddle. A little girl asking her mother why the trees seem to be bending, when they are perfectly still. You know these signs, you've seen them before. Hallucinations, tingling limbs, dizziness, not demons, not curses, not spirits, just ergot. A quirky tidbit slips into your mind. In some medieval records, people dancing uncontrollably in the streets were later suspected to have eaten contaminated rye bread. Entire villages experienced mass dancing plagues, now thought to be neurological reactions to ergot toxins combined with panic and stress. You watch as the baker sends out another set of loaves, his smile wearing thin. He knows. The villagers know. But acknowledging the problem means acknowledging the entire grain supply might be compromised. That's not a quiet disaster. That's an impossible one. So they choose the quieter truth. A truth that creeps into the flour, into the loaves, into the dreams of anyone who eats them. A truth baked carefully each morning, kneaded with worry, risen with denial, and served warm to a village trying desperately not to taste the danger. You step away from the baker's cottage, leaving behind the warm, uneasy scent of questionable bread. The lane narrows again as it winds toward the village chapel, a small stone building with a wooden bellcote perched on top like a weary bird. Normally, this is where villagers seek a sense of certainty, a place where their fears soften and their worries feel smaller. But as you approach, something feels off. The chapel is too quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Not reverent quiet. Uneasy quiet. You slow your pace, listening. No murmured prayers drift through the open doorway. No footsteps shuffle across the worn stones. Not even the soft, familiar clink of the small votive candles being lit. Just silence. Thick. Heavy. As though even sound has decided it wants no part in whatever's happening inside. You step through the doorway. The air within is cool, faintly scented with beeswax and old wood. Light filters through the warped glass windows in narrow, dusty beams. It should feel comforting. Instead, it feels like walking into a conversation that ended 1 second too late. The priest stands near the altar with 2 elders, their voices low, their heads bent. The moment they notice you, they straighten with unnatural speed, smiles appearing like masks slapped on just a bit too late. "Welcome," the priest says. His tone is gentle, too gentle, carefully gentle. A tone that says, "We were not expecting witnesses." You wander toward the pews. A few are empty in ways they shouldn't be. The spaces where families normally gather feel strangely scattered today. You look around and notice small signs, a bench that has been moved slightly out of place, a cluster of forgotten prayer beads left on the floor, a corner where the stone appears damp despite the dry weather. The elders exchange a look. One clears his throat. "Just a quiet morning," he says. It is not a quiet morning. Quiet is not this tense. You seat yourself at the end of a pew, fingers grazing the smooth wood. A faint scratch mark catches your attention. Small, shallow, almost like someone carved hastily with a nail. You lean closer. It's a word, half-finished. Fear. The final letter trails off mid-cut. You glance up. One of the elders is watching you, eyes sharp. He quickly looks away. A soft rustle draws your attention to a side alcove. A woman kneels there, hands clasped, but her eyes are open, wide, unfocused, haunted. You take a step toward her. Her lips move silently, repeating something over and over. You strain to hear it. Not again. Not again. Your skin prickles. A young acolyte hurries across the chapel carrying a bucket of water and a cloth. He stops abruptly when he sees you watching, then shifts the bucket behind his leg like a guilty child hiding contraband sweet buns. You notice something dark smudged along the stone near a side door. Soot? No. Something heavier. Resin? Old pitch? Maybe even blood-thin streaks from an injured sheep someone brought inside for blessing. Hard to tell, and no one is offering explanations. The acolyte mutters, "We're cleaning," and disappears through a doorway that closes a bit too fast behind him. Historians still argue whether medieval chapels were actually places of stability during crises or whether they served as emotional pressure valves, silent places where fear collected like smoke. Looking around now, you're starting to think the latter. The air feels thick with things unsaid. You move toward the altar. The embroidered cloth has been tugged slightly off-centre. The candles are burned lower than usual, their wax pooling unevenly as if someone let them burn overnight in haste or prayer or panic. A cracked chalice sits near the edge, hastily repaired with pitch. Someone was rushing, someone was shaking. You turn toward the corner where villagers usually leave offerings. Today, the basket contains unusual items: chunks of salt, sprigs of rosemary, 2 carved wooden discs, and a piece of bread so burnt it's practically charcoal. Protective charms, wards. Offerings not for blessings, but for defence. A quirky tidbit surfaces. In some medieval regions, when a village felt spiritually threatened, whether by disease, famine, or unexplained events, they placed symbolic objects in the chapel to anchor the community. Salt to purify, herbs to ward off spirits, burnt bread to confuse malevolent forces. Seeing these offerings here, you realise the villagers aren't just worried about physical disasters. They're afraid of something deeper, something they cannot name without giving it power. A faint creak echoes above. You glance up at the rafters. Dust drifts downward as though something recently disturbed them. You spot a rope tied to one beam. New rope. Fresh fibres. It winds down toward a heavy plank leaning by the bell-cote ladder. Perhaps someone was prepping repairs, or perhaps someone blocked the bell temporarily. You're not sure which answer worries you more. The priest approaches quietly. "The village has been uneasy," he admits softly, voice becoming more honest now that the elders are out of earshot. "People are frightened. Many won't say it aloud, but they feel watched." You tilt your head. "By what?" He exhales slowly. "By misfortune, like something has shifted." He glances around as if the chapel walls might be listening. The sick, the animals, the grain, the forest, the wells, they come here for comfort. But when so much feels wrong at once... He doesn't finish, because he doesn't need to. You wander toward the back pews. There you find small piles of dried herbs tucked beneath the seats, protective bundles villagers placed quietly, hoping no one else would notice. More charms, more fear. But this fear isn't loud, it's quiet, simmering, swallowed. A small sound catches your attention, a faint sniffle. You turn and spot a child half hidden near a pillar, his cheeks streaked with tears. When he realizes you see him, he wipes his face quickly. "Mama's scared," he whispers. "Papa too. They said the chapel feels different now." You kneel beside him gently. "Do you feel different?" He nods. "I hear things at night. Everyone does, but no one talks about it." You rest a hand on the pew, letting him steady himself with your presence. The chapel's silence settles around you again, so deep and thick it feels almost alive. But beneath it, you sense something else. Not supernatural, not mystical, just a village weighed down by too many disasters, all creeping at once. A community stretched thin. Their faith isn't gone, but their confidence, that's what's cracking. You rise slowly and step back into the doorway, letting the sunlight touch your face again. Behind you, the chapel sighs. Wood settling, stone breathing, people hiding their fears in prayer. A quiet disaster doesn't always break buildings. Sometimes it breaks certainty. And in this village, certainty is starting to crumble just as quietly as everything else. You step out of the chapel, letting the cool daylight wash over your face as you breathe in the outside air. Air that feels strangely lighter after the heavy hush inside. You follow a winding lane toward the outskirts where the hills begin to rise and fall in soft, uneven contours. This path should lead you to the old trade road, the one villagers use to reach markets, mills, and neighbouring towns. But the moment you crest a small rise, you stop. The road isn't where it's supposed to be, not exactly gone, not erased, but quietly slipping away like a guest trying to leave a gathering without saying goodbye. The once clear path is choked in places by creeping plants, roots crossing it like slow-moving tentacles. Sections have slumped downward into shallow pits. Others have eroded, edges eaten by runoff from last winter's storms. The road looks tired, older than it is, like it's had one bad century too many. A man with a donkey approaches from the opposite direction. He navigates around a sunken patch where the ground has collapsed, forcing both him and the donkey to detour through thorny brush. The donkey protests loudly. The man sighs even louder. "Road's shifting again," he mutters as he passes, "though you didn't ask." You watch the donkey stumble slightly over a rut. The man steadies it. Then he says the line every villager uses when they don't want to fix something. "It's always been like this." It definitely has not. Historians still argue whether medieval roads deteriorated faster due to changing climate patterns or simply neglect. But standing here, you can see how easily a path disappears when nobody's responsible for maintaining it, and everyone pretends it's still fine. You walk farther, boots crunching over cracked soil and pebbles that look freshly exposed. A shallow trench cuts across the road, rainwater carving new channels with the determination of a toddler, rearranging furniture. You step over it and notice that beyond the bend, the entire path disappears under a fallen tree. The tree didn't fall recently. Moss has already claimed its trunk. Villagers must have walked around it for months. Instead of clearing it, they've created a makeshift side path through the grass, narrow, muddy, and clearly unstable. A goat track pretending to be infrastructure. You step onto the detour and sink slightly into the mud. Lovely. A group of children emerges from the brush carrying a bundle of sticks. One slips, drops the sticks, and scatters them across the path. He groans dramatically. "We're not supposed to walk the old road anymore," one of them says while helping gather the fallen sticks. "Why not?" you ask. The kid shrugs with the casual certainty of someone repeating grown-up logic without understanding it. "It's unlucky." Unlucky? Of course. Not unstable, not eroded, not collapsing. Unlucky. You walk farther and notice a stretch where the road has literally disappeared beneath encroaching soil. Grass and weeds blanket it smoothly, weaving over the stones like a soft green lie. Someone placed stones along the side to form a temporary border, but the border has already been swallowed by creeping vegetation. A quirky tidbit pops into your mind. Some medieval villagers believed roads wandered when spirits were displeased. That's how they explained sudden bends, eroded sections, or new paths forming. Roads didn't break. They wandered. You wonder if someone in this village has already told that story. It would certainly be easier than admitting the land is shifting underneath them. A wagon approaches from behind you, its wheels clattering loudly, too loudly, on the uneven surface. The driver sees you standing near a deep rut and waves impatiently. "Step aside. Bad stretch here," he warns. You move as the wagon passes, wobbling dangerously as one wheel drops into a divot. The driver curses, jerks the reins, and barely manages to pull the wagon free. He wipes his brow. "Road's no good this season," he mutters. You gesture to the ground. "Does it get worse every year?" He hesitates, too long before answering. "Maybe." Another wagon pulls up behind him. The drivers exchange looks, the shared expression of people who know something is wrong but aren't ready to say it. You continue your slow examination and come upon a stone marker half buried near the crossroads. It's supposed to stand tall, pointing travellers toward nearby towns. Instead, it leans awkwardly, half swallowed by soil and moss. You brush away the earth around its base. The stone wiggles, barely anchored. A few more winters, and it will fall completely. You take a few steps back and realize something strange. The entire path has started shifting southward. Not dramatically, just a few feet, but enough that travellers are creating a new unofficial path that bends unnaturally around a low rise. The original road is slowly being reclaimed by erosion, roots, and neglect. A pair of old women approach carrying baskets. They step onto the new detour, carefully avoiding the main road entirely. When they see you examining the old stones, one of them smiles sympathetically, the way someone smiles at a person who still believes in lost causes. "Best to use the new path," she advises. "The old ones—" She searches for a word. Her friend whispers, "Tired. Tired. Not broken, not collapsing, just tired." Behind them, a boy on a small pony trots along the path. The pony suddenly halts, hooves scraping at the dirt. The boy nudges, but the pony refuses to cross a particular patch of road, where the earth dips ever so slightly. Animals know things. The boy finally guides the pony around the spot, muttering, "Stupid animal." But you can see he's uneasy too. As you walk farther, the road becomes a mosaic of avoidance behaviours. Stones piled to cover unstable patches, branches laid across the ground to mark thin soil, shortcuts carved through bushes, wagons rerouting around spots that look off, travellers refusing to walk near sections where the earth feels hollow. Quiet disasters aren't always dramatic. Sometimes they're slow, creeping changes, the kind villagers adapt to without acknowledging. You reach the far end of the path and turn to look back. From here, the road looks like a scar, twisting, sagging, thinning with every bend. A fading artery connecting struggling cottages and silent chapels to a world that may soon be out of reach. Not because the world moved, because the path disappeared beneath their feet. Quietly, steadily, one stone at a time. You leave the fading road behind and re-enter the village through its small market square, a space that should feel lively, noisy, full of clattering carts, loud voices, and the comforting chaos of people arguing over onions. But today, as you step into the square, the mood feels staged, like actors performing cheerfulness for an audience they hope isn't paying too much attention. Bright fabrics hang from stalls that look slightly emptier than usual. A basket of apples contains more leaves than apples. A butcher's table displays cuts so thin you could read a sermon through them. And yet every vendor you pass beams at you as though business is booming. Wonderful morning, one calls. A fine selection today, another insists as a chicken feather blows across his nearly empty stall. You stroll toward the centre well, normally the market's gossip hub, where a small group of traders gather. Their voices are unusually upbeat. Too upbeat. Every sentence has brittle optimism, wrapped tightly around a nervous core. A woman selling pottery waves energetically as you approach. Best wares in the region, she declares. You glance at her table. Half her items have cracks filled with wax painted over a little too enthusiastically. One jug wobbles like it's trying to walk away from its responsibilities. She catches you staring at the cracks. It's decorative, she says. You nod kindly. I meant to do that, she adds, as though convincing herself will fix the jug. A man selling dried fish nearby fans the air with a bundle of reeds to keep flies away. The fish behind him looks suspiciously small, either underfed or cut in half to appear more numerous. He sees you noticing and coughs loudly to cover the awkwardness. Fresh catch, he announces. One fish twitches in the afternoon heat, falling over with the dramatic flare of a fainting goat. You wander deeper into the square, listening to the overlapping conversations. They'll have more grain next week, I'm sure. We're only short today because of the weather. Yes, my cousin's cart is on its way with more goods. My husband says the roads are fine. The livestock are recovering quickly. Every sentence is an act of deflection, every reassurance a paper shield. Historians still argue whether medieval markets acted as economic stabilizers or emotional theatres. Standing here, watching these merchants smile despite shortages, illness, and creeping disasters, you're starting to realize markets were both. A place where reality was repainted with cheerful tones, even when the paint was running thin. You stop at a produce cart where a thin layer of vegetables has been artfully arranged to hide the empty spaces beneath. A boy around 10 years old stands behind the cart. He forces a grin. Carrots, he offers. The carrots look soft. Turnips? The turnips look offended. Onions? The onions glare at you like they'd bite back. You pick up a carrot gently. It bends slightly. The boy winces. They're still good. You smile. Of course. He exhales with relief, unaware you're lying for him the way he's lying for everyone else. A group of women stands by the cloth merchant's stall, touching bolts of fabric and whispering. As you walk closer, you hear fragments. Don't tell them we're short on wool. Say the sheep are just late growing their coats. If the reeve hears we're struggling, we'll lose next month's trade routes. Then they spot you and immediately shift into bright conversation about colours and patterns, and absolutely nothing about shortages. They talk fast, the way people do when silence would reveal too much. You move toward the butcher's stall. His counter holds a few small cuts and something that might once have been a rabbit. You're not confident. The butcher greets you with a booming laugh that shakes his entire torso. Plenty of meat today, he declares. You glance pointedly at the nearly bare table. He leans in and whispers, "Imagine what was here this morning." You lean in and whisper back, "Was there anything here this morning?" He leans back silently. You both share the kind of eye contact that says everything. Words cannot. A faint commotion draws your attention to the square's edge. where a woman's stall collapses under its own weight. Cloth spill to the ground, revealing that half her bolts are stuffed with straw to make them seem fuller. She freezes, cheeks flushing red. Other merchants rush forward, not to judge, but to help her restack the illusion. They all know, they're all doing the same thing. Another stall displays jars of honey, except the honey is suspiciously pale. A man dips a spoon inside one jar and stirs. The honey sloshes like thin soup. He quickly adds more wax from a small pouch, stirs again, and forces a smile when he sees you looking. "New bees," he explains. The bees buzzing near the jar look deeply unconvinced. You step away and let the noise of the market wash around you. Laughter here. Forced cheer there. Even the marketplace animals, donkeys, chickens, a goat perched on a crate for votes, seem subdued. A goat bleats weakly. Its owner pets it. "Just tired," he says. The goat wheezes in disagreement. You wander to the edge of the square, leaning against a sun-warmed wall. From here, the whole scene spreads before you like a painting, vibrant from afar but cracked up close. Stalls spaced farther apart than usual to hide the emptiness. Merchants calling loudly to drown out the hush of scarcity. Villagers clutching purses tighter than their secrets. Children asked to smile because their parents cannot. A quirky tidbit returns to you. Medieval markets often had good luck callers. People paid to hype the energy so customers would feel safe spending money. Some wore bright colours. Some sang. Some simply shouted nonsense to keep spirits high. You spot a young man at the fountain doing exactly that, singing a cheerful rhyme about onions. His voice is bright. His eyes are exhausted. Then, as if on cue, a breeze sweeps through the square and lifts several sheets of parchment from a scribe's stall. The papers scatter like frightened birds. The scribe curses under his breath, lunges to gather them, and when one sheet lands near your feet, you glance at it. It's a ledger, with far too many empty lines. He snatches it up quickly, forcing a grin. "Just between us," he whispers. "Don't tell anyone how quiet business actually is." You nod again. The entire village seems to be whispering that same plea. As you leave the marketplace, the forced cheer slowly fades behind you. But the truth lingers. Markets don't lie. But the people running them do, not out of deception, but out of hope. Hope that tomorrow's stalls will be fuller. Hope that rumours of shortages will stay quiet. Hope that the village can pretend long enough for fortune to change. A quiet disaster hums beneath the cheerful chatter. Soft, persistent, but unmistakable. You leave the market behind, its hollow cheer fading as the lane curves gently upward toward the small hill where the village bell tower stands. The tower isn't grand, just a wooden frame with a weathered bronze bell hanging beneath a shingled roof. But it has always been the village's voice. It rings for weddings, funerals, storms, danger, meetings, lost sheep, found sheep, and occasionally because a bored kid managed to sneak inside. But tonight, the bell is silent. Utterly, unnervingly silent. You pause at the foot of the hill expecting at least a faint metallic sway in the breeze. But no, the bell hangs motionless, as if holding its breath. The rope, usually left draped casually along the ground, is wound tightly around a peg. Deliberately, firmly, almost anxiously. You climb the hill slowly. The air grows stiller the higher you go, as though even the wind is waiting for something that isn't coming. Halfway up, you spot an old man sitting on a stump, hands folded, eyes fixed on the bell. His expression is calm but not peaceful, more like resignation wearing a borrowed mask. He nods at you. "They tied it," he says. "Why?" you ask. He shrugs without looking away. "Because ringing it means admitting something's wrong." Of course. In this village, silence isn't an accident. It's a strategy. You reach the bell tower and examine the rope. Someone has knotted it repeatedly. Not decorative knots, fear knots. Knots that say, "Do not ring this unless absolutely necessary, and ideally not even then." You give the rope a tiny tug. The knot resists like a stubborn mule. The bell above you catches a ray of late afternoon sun, glinting faintly. You notice scratches along the lower rim, fresh ones. Someone tried to ring it recently, probably in haste, probably during the night. The villagers must have heard it begin to swing, must have panicked, must have rushed to stop it before the sound carried across the fields and made rumours run faster than truth. Historians still argue whether medieval bells served more as spiritual protectors or practical alarms. But when a bell stops ringing altogether, that's not tradition, that's fear. You step inside the small shelter beneath the tower. Dust lies thick on the floor where it shouldn't. A half-burned candle sits near the wall, dripped wax trails like frozen tears. Someone kept vigil here recently, watching through the night, waiting for something. Why? For whom? Or for what? You touch the wooden post. It trembles faintly, not from instability, from tension. Stored fear has a way of settling into structures. Behind you, footsteps crunch softly. A woman approaches, holding a basket of rushlights. She hesitates before speaking, glancing over each shoulder. "We don't ring it anymore," she whispers. "Not after the last time." "What happened last time?" you ask. She presses her lips together. People woke frightened, thought it meant plague, or fire, or raiders, or something else. This something else hangs in the air like an uninvited guest. She sets the rushlights down and backs away as though afraid the bell might ring of its own accord. You climb the narrow ladder up into the tower's small loft. From here, you see the whole village spread below. Roof lines drooping, market stalls thinning, roads fading, smoke drifting strangely. The quiet disasters you've traced all day form a single fragile mosaic. You rest your hand on the bell. It's cold, still, heavy with the weight of things unspoken. You imagine it ringing, just once. The sound spreading down the hills through the crooked lanes, past the granary and the chapel and the forest edge. Every villager would stop, every head would turn. And in that turning, they would be forced to admit what they've been avoiding. Something is deeply wrong, and they are not ready for that. A flock of birds bursts from the treetops on the outskirts. For a moment, you think perhaps the villagers should hear something, anything, loud enough to stir them. But then a heavier silence returns, settling around the tower like a blanket. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your mind. Some medieval communities believed bells chased away evil spirits. Others believed bells angered them. One chronicler even wrote that if a village bell rang on a night of bad omens, the sound would travel crooked. Looking at this village now, you suspect the villagers are terrified of what message the bell might send, and what message it might reveal. You descend the ladder and return to the hilltop. As you step away from the tower, you notice subtle signs at its base, offerings, small, quiet ones, a sprig of rosemary, a smooth stone, a coin, things meant to keep the bell quiet rather than encourage it. You stop and look back at it one last time. A tool meant to warn them is now a symbol of their refusal to be warned. Below, the villagers move about their routines, their faces set in practiced calm. But none of them look toward the bell, none of them check the rope, none of them even glance at the hill. Their silence is deliberate, defensive, fragile. And as you descend the path, you understand the truth. Some disasters are loud, others whisper, but the quietest ones, the ones people dare not acknowledge, are the ones that make even the bells fall silent. You walk down from the bell tower hill, the silence lingering behind you like a shadow that refuses to loosen its grip. Ahead, the village spreads out in the soft light of early evening, a warm glow settling over rooftops, smoke curling lazily from chimneys, children drifting home, tools being set aside, doors closing softly. At first glance, it almost looks peaceful, picturesque even. A small medieval world winding down after a long day. But you've seen too much now to be fooled by the quiet, because beneath the smile of the village lies the weight of everything they're trying to hide. You walk slowly through the lane, letting the day settle into its nighttime rhythms. A man closes the shutters of his cottage with the confident slam of someone pretending the hinge isn't loose. A woman sweeps her stoop briskly even though it's already clean, because sweeping feels like control. A few children laugh as they chase one another past the well, though their glances toward the darkening water reveal their unease. Everyone smiles, everyone moves, everyone pretends. The quiet disasters move with them. You pass the cattle pens where the sick animals lie in uneasy heaps. Farmers speak softly, avoiding eye contact, pretending the shivering bodies aren't symptoms of something spreading. The air carries faint hints of herbal smoke drifting from makeshift fumigation fires. "Just keeping insects away," someone calls. You both know they're trying to keep something else at bay. Further down, the baker pulls the last few loaves from his oven. He smiles broadly at his customers. and forbids them from seeing the batch he burned on purpose because the smell wasn't right. He wipes sweat from his brow, glances at his dwindling flour supply and declares loudly, "Tomorrow's bread will be better." His wife, behind him, closes her eyes as if wishing the words could make it true. Historians still argue whether medieval optimism was denial or resilience. Walking this lane, you realise it was both. You stop beside a cottage whose roof sags even more than it did an hour ago. The family sits outside on stools, eating their evening meal, laughing softly. But their seats are set carefully away from the doorframe. They know the beam above it is failing. You watch the mother glance up at the roof 3 times in less than a minute. She smiles each time, pretending she's looking at birds. Down the lane you hear the faint clatter of a dropped pot, followed by quiet cursing. A man rushes out of his home to collect fallen firewood. He pauses at the edge of his yard, staring toward the forest. The trees seem darker now, leaning slightly nearer. You see him shiver, not from cold, but from knowing the woods are shifting. Not fast and not dramatically, but definitely. He shakes his head and mutters, "Mine's playing tricks," before returning inside. It's not. The market stalls have been packed away, leaving the square strangely bare. A few scraps of fabric flap in the wind. A single carrot lies abandoned on a table, its limp body perfectly representing the energy level of both the vegetable and the village. A merchant stands alone, staring at his empty baskets. When he sees you, he straightens and calls, "Good sales today." His voice cracks. He clears his throat and repeats it more evenly. You nod, offering kindness he very much needs. You pass the chapel. A faint glow trickles from the windows, just a few candles burning inside. You hear murmured prayers, thin and weary, the kind spoken by people who fear the quiet more than the loud. A woman exits, clutching a handful of dried herbs wrapped in cloth. She stops when she sees you, then whispers, "Protection." She doesn't explain what from. She doesn't have to. You continue toward the edge of the village where the ground dips and rises subtly. Shifts you now recognize as the slow settling of forgotten tunnels far underground. You pause, feeling the faint give beneath your boots, a reminder that even the earth is quietly losing its certainty. Night deepens. The sky turns a rich blue, the kind that makes stars appear one by one like hesitant confessions. Lanterns flicker in windows, doors close, laughter fades, and still you can sense the tension under every gesture, every word, every footstep. You walk past the granary, hearing the soft rustle inside, not just of grain, but of small bodies moving where they shouldn't. The keeper stands outside, staring at the door as though willing the noises to stop. When you approach, he forces a smile and says, "Plenty of food for winter." His eyes betray him. You say nothing. He exhales. You walk on. Further ahead, a villager tips a bucket of murky tannery-stained water into a ditch, glancing around guiltily. He smooths the soil over it quickly. "No one needs to worry about that," he mutters, but he keeps his feet well away from the puddle. At the village's edge, you stop. The hills darken. The forest whispers. The marsh glows with faint, eerie lights in the distance. You watch as the villagers settle into their homes, each one carrying the weight of unacknowledged truths. And yet, each one lighting a candle, each one making a small meal, each one tending their weary animals, each one hoping tomorrow will be easier. They live with quiet disasters not because they don't see them, but because they choose to face them quietly, not bravely, not foolishly, just humanly. You take a deep breath, letting the night air fill your lungs, cool and steady. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of the village settle around you. Distant laughter, a creaking door, an aching roof beam shifting in its sleep. A village pretending at dawn, and pretending again at dusk. But beneath all the pretending lies something fragile and real. Hope. Not loud, not bold. Just a thin thread of belief that maybe, quiet disasters can stay quiet a little longer. And tonight, under this gentle medieval sky, you walk the last stretch of the lane feeling the weight of everything they hide, and everything they still manage to endure. The evening deepens, and the village softens into stillness. You feel it as the last lamplight blurs at the edges, the sounds of weary footsteps fade, and the cool air settles gently around the rooftops like a comforting shawl. The quiet disasters you've witnessed, the sagging beams, the trembling earth, The strange marsh lights, the secrets kept behind shuttered windows, seem to loosen their grip in the hush of night. You take one more slow breath, letting the air fill and calm you. The village, for all its cracks and worries, grows peaceful in the dark. Fires dim to soft embers, animals nestle into straw, the forest hushes its rustling, and you can imagine each family sinking into rest, unaware of the imaginations that kept you turning their world gently in your hands. The lanes stretch calmly now, without urgency. The worries fade into something distant and harmless, like shapes in fog dissolving as you draw near. Even the bell on the hill seems less tense, silhouetted against the sky as though finally settling into its own stillness. Let your breath lengthen. Let your shoulders release. Let your thoughts drift like the slow rise of smoke from a quiet chimney. Nothing reaches for you here. Nothing demands your attention. Everything for this brief moment simply is. And as the last traces of daylight vanish behind the hills, the village curls inward, peaceful in its imperfection, resting in a silence that no longer feels heavy, but soft, warm, and protective. Close your eyes. Let the world dim a little more. Let the night gather gently around you. You've walked enough roads for now. Rest. Breathe. Sleep well, my friend.